You don't wake up one day and decide to trust the wrong people. You build that trust slowly, brick by brick, believing the ground under you is solid. You believe family is the safest place on earth. You believe love makes people honest. And you believe sacrifice is always seen. I was a hard-working man. Not perfect. Just someone who showed up every day and carried the weight without complaining. I believed family was everything because that's what I was taught. I married Emily with that belief in my chest. I shared my home, my struggles, my future with her. She was my wife, my calm place, my proof that loyalty still existed. And then there was my younger brother, Daniel. He lived like a shadow beside me. Always there, always close, always quiet. I trusted him more than anyone because blood is supposed to mean something. My parents always favored him. I saw it, but I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love doesn't need balance to be real. I swallowed that truth and called it maturity. You do that too. You ignore the unfairness when it comes from people you love. You tell yourself you're strong enough to carry more. You convince yourself that loyalty is unbreakable, that family would never cross lines that can't be erased. There were signs. Small ones. Missed calls that didn't get returned. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Strange looks that lasted a second too long. Dinners where silence felt heavier than words. But I brushed them off. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to become the kind of man who doubts the people closest to him. Because deep down, you believe that if you give enough, if you sacrifice enough, people will protect you the same way. I worked harder. I trusted deeper. I gave more space. I believed love meant patience and loyalty meant blindness. I told myself that unease was just fear, and fear had no place in a family built on trust. But there's a difference between peace and avoidance. There's a difference between faith and denial. And sometimes, the mind senses danger long before the heart is ready to accept it. Late at night, when the house was quiet, that feeling crept in. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft pressure in the chest, like something valuable was sitting on the edge of a table, ready to fall. I couldn't name it, but I felt it. You've felt it too. That moment when everything looks fine, yet something inside you tightens for no clear reason. This is the stage before the collapse. The calm before truth demands to be seen. You don't lose everything in an instant. First, you lose your certainty. And when certainty cracks, everything you built on it begins to shake. I didn't know it yet, but something precious was already slipping through my fingers. And the people I trusted the most were standing closest to the fall. Some moments don't announce themselves. They don't warn you. They just arrive, and divide your life into before and after. That night, I came home early. No reason. No plan. Just a feeling that pulled me back to the house I thought was mine. The lights were on, but the silence was wrong. Not peaceful. Not calm. It was heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. You know that kind of quiet. The kind that makes your steps sound louder than they should. As I walked inside, my chest tightened. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was tired. But my body already knew what my mind was refusing to accept. My hands felt cold. My heartbeat didn't slow down. It sped up, like it was trying to escape before I did. I went upstairs. Each step felt slower than the last, like time was stretching just to punish me. Halfway up, I almost turned around. You do that sometimes, when your soul senses a truth your heart isn't ready to survive. But I kept going, because I trusted the people waiting at the top. Then I opened the bedroom door, and everything stopped. There are things you can't prepare for. No amount of love, no amount of loyalty makes you ready to see the people who built your world tearing it apart in your own bed. My wife. My brother. Together. In the place where I slept. Where I dreamed. Where I believed I was safe. My vision blurred, not because I was crying, but because my body didn't know how to process what my eyes were seeing. It felt like my chest was collapsing inward. Like someone had wrapped their hands around my heart and squeezed. My knees almost gave out. My hands started shaking so hard I couldn't even close them. You hear people talk about betrayal like it's emotional pain. But it's physical too. It burns. It suffocates. It feels like your body is rejecting the reality in front of you. Emily screamed my name. She cried instantly. Tears, apologies, words crashing into each other. But I couldn't hear her. Daniel didn't say anything. He couldn't even look at me. My own brother, standing there with his head down, like a child caught stealing, not a man who had destroyed someone's life. I wanted to yell. I wanted to break something. I wanted to ask why. But no sound came out. My throat locked. My mind went numb. When the people you trust the most become strangers, language stops working. I kept thinking, this isn't real. This has to be a mistake. Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Because the truth was too heavy to carry all at once. Emily kept crying, saying she was sorry, saying it didn't mean anything, saying it just happened. But that's the lie betrayal always tells. It says it was an accident. It says it didn't matter. It says your pain is an overreaction. Daniel still wouldn't look at me. And that hurt more than if he had shouted. Because silence from someone who knows they're wrong is louder than any confession. Later, my parents came. I don't even remember who called them. I remember standing there, feeling like a ghost in my own house, waiting for someone, anyone, to say this was wrong. Waiting for anger. For defense. For justice. But they chose silence. No shouting. No outrage. Just quiet faces and lowered eyes. Like the truth was too uncomfortable to confront. Like peace mattered more than what had been done to me. That silence cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Because it told me something I didn't want to know. That I was alone in a room full of family. That the people who raised me were willing to let this pass without standing beside me. You expect enemies to hurt you. You don't expect the people who taught you about love to look away when you need it most. I felt humiliated. Stripped. Small. Like my entire life had been exposed and dismissed in one night. Everything I believed about loyalty, family, and sacrifice collapsed at once. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't demand answers. I just grabbed my jacket and walked out. Out of my bedroom. Out of my house. Out of the life I thought I had built. As I stepped outside, the air felt different. Colder. Sharper. Like the world was reminding me that nothing was waiting to catch me. I stood there for a moment, not knowing where to go, realizing I didn't belong anywhere anymore. That's what betrayal really does. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you a stranger to your own life. And as I walked away that night, I didn't know it yet, but the man who trusted without question was already gone. You think the worst pain has already happened. You think betrayal is the bottom. But then comes the moment when the people who should protect you decide you're the problem for being hurt. After that night, I waited. Not for apologies. I knew better than that. I waited for my parents to stand beside me. To say what happened was wrong. To draw a line. To choose me, just once. I told myself blood would matter when everything else had failed. It didn't. They sat across from me with tired faces and careful words. Not angry. Not shocked. Just controlled. My mother told me to be mature. My father said I shouldn't destroy the family over one mistake. One mistake. That's how they named it. As if my marriage, my trust, my dignity were things that could be misplaced and picked up later. I realized then they weren't asking me to heal. They were asking me to disappear quietly. They protected Daniel. They always had. This time, they didn't even pretend otherwise. They talked about his future, his stress, his weakness. No one asked how I was breathing. No one asked how I was sleeping. It was clear where the balance had always been, and where I had never stood. You grow up thinking favoritism is something small. Extra attention. A softer voice. But in moments like this, it becomes undeniable. It becomes a verdict. And the verdict said I was expendable. Emily moved out that same week. Not alone. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. The woman who cried when she was caught now packed her life without hesitation. That's when I understood her tears weren't regret. They were fear of being seen. In 7 days, I lost my home, my marriage, and my place in my own family. I walked through empty rooms that still smelled like her. I stared at walls that once held plans and laughter. Every object felt contaminated, like memory itself had turned against me. I couldn't tell which moments were real anymore and which ones were lies I had helped create by trusting too much. My emotions didn't come in order. They crashed into each other. Anger 1 minute. Grief the next. shame without warning, confusion that left me staring at nothing for hours. I kept asking myself what I missed, what I did wrong, how I could be so blind. That's the dangerous part. When betrayal convinces you that your pain is proof of your failure. Some nights, I slept in my car. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it didn't matter. But sitting there in the dark, watching condensation form on the windows, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. A grown man with nowhere that felt safe. No voice that wanted to hear him. You replay memories when you're alone like that. Conversations. Laughs. Family dinners. And suddenly they all feel poisoned. You start questioning every smile, every hug, every promise. You wonder if you were loved, or just tolerated until you became inconvenient. I questioned my worth constantly. I asked myself if loyalty made me weak, if kindness made me invisible, if being the responsible one meant being the one who gets sacrificed when things get messy. There's a special kind of pain that comes from being told to stay quiet to keep the peace, because it teaches you that your suffering is less important than everyone else's comfort. But somewhere in that darkness, something shifted. It didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic moment, just a quiet realization sitting with me in the car one night. I couldn't stay broken forever. Not for them. Not because they refused to see me. Not because they chose silence over truth. I didn't know what healing looked like yet. I didn't know how to rebuild anything. But I knew one thing with clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. If I stayed here, questioning my worth, begging for validation from people who abandoned me, I would lose more than my family. I would lose myself. And that was something I refused to let them take. There comes a point when pain stops screaming and starts whispering. That's the moment you either disappear, or you decide to stay. I met Marcus on a day when I wasn't looking for help. I wasn't even looking up. I was just moving through the world, doing what I had learned to do best, carrying things alone. He noticed the silence before I said a word. Not the quiet kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that follows someone who has been broken and learned not to talk about it. Marcus was an old friend. Not close enough to know everything, but close enough to see when something was wrong. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions that demanded answers. He just listened when I finally spoke. No judgment. No advice dressed up as wisdom. Just presence. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. He offered me work. Nothing glamorous. Honest labor. Something that required my hands and my focus. He offered me a couch. No conditions. No pity. Just space to exist without being reminded of what I had lost. That couch felt like stability. Not comfort. Stability. A place where I could close my eyes without fear. For the first time in months, I slept without replaying the past on repeat. I didn't heal all at once. I didn't wake up motivated or inspired. I woke up tired. But I showed up anyway. Every day. Work became my anchor. Discipline became my shield. When emotions threatened to drag me under, I tightened my routine. I controlled what I could when everything else felt out of reach. I wasn't chasing revenge. Not yet. I was chasing survival. You don't rebuild a burn house by staring at the ashes. You start by laying one brick somewhere else. I stopped begging for love, from my parents, from my past, from memories that no longer wanted me. I stopped explaining my pain to people who had already decided it wasn't important. That alone gave me strength I didn't know I had. Marcus never tried to fix me. He treated me like I was still a man, not a problem to solve. He expected me to work, to show discipline, to respect myself. And in doing that, he reminded me of something I had forgotten, that my value didn't come from being chosen by others. Slowly, my mind began to clear. The chaos inside me lost its grip. I learned to sit with my thoughts without drowning in them. I learned that control isn't about suppressing pain. It's about not letting pain control your actions. There were nights when anger rose in my chest like fire. I felt it. I acknowledged it. Then I let it pass without feeding it. That was new. That was power. I realized something important during those months. Pain doesn't arrive with instructions. It doesn't tell you what it will become. That part is up to you. The same experience that destroys one person can sharpen another. The difference isn't strength, it's choice. And I chose to survive. Months passed. I didn't reach out to my family. Neither did they. The silence no longer surprised me. It taught me where I stood. I accepted it without bitterness. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means you stop expecting people to be who they've already proven they're not. Then one day, my phone rang. It was my parents. Not to ask how I was. Not to apologize. Not to acknowledge the damage they had done. They asked for money. I listened quietly. And in that moment, I felt something solid settle inside me. No rage. No desperation. Just clarity. The same people who told me to be mature when my life collapsed were now reaching for me when it was convenient. I didn't answer right away, because I finally understood something that would shape everything that came next. Surviving wasn't just about staying alive. It was about deciding who would never have the power to break me again. Some news doesn't shock you. It confirms what your soul already suspected. I found out through a call that wasn't meant to hurt me, but did anyway. Emily was pregnant. Not just pregnant. Pregnant with my brother's child. The words landed softly, almost carefully, like they expected me to receive them with understanding. Like time had cleaned the blood off the knife. My parents called it a blessing. They said it with pride. With relief. As if something holy had risen from something rotten. They talked about new beginnings, about family growing stronger, about mistakes turning into miracles. They never mentioned how that miracle was built on the ruins of my life. And then came the part they didn't hesitate over. They expected me to help. Financially. Consistently. Quietly. Because I was the responsible one. That word again. The label they had used my entire life. Responsible meant dependable. Responsible meant silent. Responsible meant you absorb the damage so others don't have to feel it. Rage burned inside me. Not explosive. Controlled. The kind of anger that tightens your jaw and sharpens your focus. I felt it in my chest, rising, demanding release. Every part of me wanted to ask how they could say this out loud without shame. How they could look at me as a resource instead of a son. But I stayed calm. That calm wasn't weakness. It was restraint. And restraint is dangerous when it's learned through pain. Inside me, two voices fought. One wanted revenge. Not dramatic, not violent, but precise. Cut them off. Let them struggle. Let them feel even a fraction of what I had carried alone. The other voice spoke of dignity, of control, of not becoming what they expected me to be when they stopped seeing me as human. I didn't answer right away. I listened. I let them talk. I let them explain how hard things were, how Daniel was stressed, how Emily needed support, how a child changes everything. They never asked if I was okay with any of this. They assumed compliance was my natural state. That assumption told me everything. I agreed to help. Not because I felt guilty. Not because I still wanted their approval. And not because I believed their story. I agreed because I wanted to see how deep their entitlement went. Sometimes the best way to understand people is to stop resisting them and watch what they do when they think they've won. I wanted to see how far they would push. How much they would take. How little they would give back. They thought I was still the same man. The one who carried everyone quietly. The one who sacrificed without keeping score. The one who mistook endurance for love. I wasn't. Every interaction became information. Every request revealed something. The money was never enough. The gratitude never lasted. Their tone shifted from careful to casual, from asking to expecting. They spoke about my support as if it were already theirs, earned by blood instead of behavior. And I stayed calm. That calm unnerved them. I could hear it in their voices. They expected resistance, or tears, or anger, but I gave them none of it. I gave them structure, limits, clear terms. I controlled the pace. I controlled the access. For the first time, the balance began to change. They didn't notice it at first. People rarely do when power slips quietly out of their hands. They were too busy enjoying the comfort of believing I was still beneath them emotionally. That belief made them careless. And carelessness reveals truth. I watched how quickly they stopped pretending this situation was complicated. How easily they justified everything once the burden wasn't theirs to carry. I saw Emily's true nature in the distance. Not remorseful, not reflective, just focused on survival and comfort. The child wasn't the problem. Innocence never is. The problem was how they used innocence as a shield. How they hid behind it to avoid accountability. Helping them didn't weaken me. It strengthened my clarity. I learned that dignity doesn't always look like refusal. Sometimes it looks like patience. Like waiting. Like choosing the moment when walking away, or standing firm, will finally be understood. This wasn't submission. It was positioning. They thought I was supporting their new family. What I was really doing was reclaiming my power. And as I watched them settle into comfort they didn't earn, one truth became impossible to ignore. They had mistaken my silence for permission. They had mistaken my help for obedience. And they had no idea how much I had already changed. The man they betrayed no longer existed. And the man standing in his place was finally deciding how this story would end. Truth doesn't arrive to make you feel better. It arrives to show you who you've become. Emily reached out to me quietly. No drama. No apologies wrapped in emotion. Just a message that carried weight because it came too late. Her life with Daniel was falling apart. Not suddenly. Not tragically. Slowly. Predictably. He cheated. More than once. He drank. He disappeared when responsibility showed up. He failed at providing stability, presence, and safety. The same man my parents protected. The same man she chose. She admitted it without romance or denial. She said she chose comfort, not love. She chose what felt easier in the moment. She chose what looked safe on the surface. And now she was living with the consequences of that choice. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel anger. I felt clarity. Because when someone finally tells you the truth after you've already survived the lie, it doesn't reopen the wound. It confirms that you were never crazy for feeling the pain in the first place. She talked about regret, about loneliness, about how things weren't what she imagined. I listened without interrupting. Not because I cared to fix anything, but because listening no longer cost me my self-respect. Her regret wasn't redemption. It was recognition. And recognition doesn't rebuild what was destroyed. Around the same time, my parents started demanding more money. Not asking. Demanding. The entitlement had grown bold. They spoke as if my support was guaranteed, as if my role had been permanently assigned. They talked about pressure, about responsibility, about how much they were carrying. They never talked about what they had done to me. That's when I finally spoke my truth. Not with anger. Not with raised voices. Not with emotional speeches meant to wound. I spoke clearly. I told them I would no longer pay. I told them my support had limits, and those limits had already been crossed. I told them I wasn't responsible for choices I didn't make, or consequences I warned them about. I told them I was done sacrificing myself to protect their comfort. There was silence on the other end. Then panic. They argued. They guilt. They reminded me of family, of duty, of everything they had given me growing up. They tried to pull me back into the role I had outgrown, the one who absorbs pressure so others don't have to feel it. But I didn't move. That was the moment I understood how much power I had given away before. Not because they were strong, but because I had been willing to carry what wasn't mine. Watching them scramble, watching their certainty crack, showed me how dependent they had become on my silence. And I didn't raise my voice once. Emotional justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like watching people face reality without your support holding it together for them. It looks like stepping back and letting consequences do what you were never allowed to. Daniel's downfall wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. Missed responsibilities. Broken trust. A life built on shortcuts collapsing under its own weight. The same traits that made him feel exciting eventually made him unreliable. And Emily saw it too late. I didn't take pleasure in that. Because pain repeating itself doesn't heal you. It just reminds you why you had to leave. When the conversations ended, I didn't slam doors. I didn't deliver final speeches. I didn't need to prove anything. I walked away calmly, because calm is what happens when you no longer need validation from the people who hurt you. That's the cost of truth. It strips away illusions. It removes roles you never consented to. And it leaves you standing alone, but whole. I didn't lose my family that day. I lost the burden of trying to save people who never tried to save me. And for the first time, walking away didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. Letting go doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like standing without armor, waiting to see if the wounds still hurt. My parents didn't stop when I set boundaries. They changed tactics. Guilt came first. Long messages about everything they had sacrificed, about how much they had done for me, as if love were a transaction I had failed to repay. Then came stories of illness, weakness, sleepless nights, subtle reminders that if something happened to them, I would have to live with it. And when that didn't work, they turned outward. Public shame, quiet whispers, carefully chosen words shared with relatives and friends. Stories shaped to make me sound cold, ungrateful, difficult. I could feel the old wounds open again, the part of me that once needed their approval tightening in my chest. But something was different this time. The pain still arrived, but it didn't take control. I felt it without obeying it. I recognized it for what it was, manipulation wrapped in familiarity. And that recognition gave me space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to choose. I spent a lot of time alone during that period. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. I reflected on what family was supposed to mean and what it had meant in my life. I realized how often I had confused obligation with love, silence with peace, endurance with strength. Family isn't the people who demand your suffering to keep their comfort intact. It isn't the people who rewrite your pain to protect their image. And it isn't the people who only reach for you when they need something. That truth didn't make me bitter. It made me honest. Forgiveness came slowly. Not as a dramatic decision, but as a quiet release. I didn't forgive them because they deserved it. I forgave because carrying resentment was tying me to a past that no longer fit who I was becoming. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't reconciliation. It doesn't require contact or understanding. It's simply choosing not to let old wounds decide your future reactions. I forgave my parents for their weakness. I forgave Emily for choosing comfort over character. I forgave Daniel for being exactly who he had always shown himself to be. And finally, I forgave myself. For ignoring signs. For staying silent too long. For believing that love meant self-erasure. That was the heaviest weight of all, and releasing it changed everything. The storm inside me began to calm. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because I stopped fighting battles that no longer mattered. I stopped replaying conversations that would never end differently. I stopped waiting for accountability from people incapable of giving it. Peace didn't arrive loudly. It settled in gradually. In the way my shoulders relaxed. In the way my thoughts slowed. In the way my past stopped interrupting my present. I no longer needed closure from them. My growth had become my closure. I understood then that moving on isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without bleeding. It's about carrying lessons instead of scars. It's about choosing a future that isn't shaped by the hands that hurt you. Letting go wasn't losing something. It was reclaiming myself. And as the weight finally lifted, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not revenge, not validation. Freedom. Quiet. Steady. Earned freedom. The kind that doesn't need anyone else to agree with it. The storm had passed. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next one. Years change you in ways pain never could on its own. Not because time heals everything, but because time reveals what truly matters. I'm speaking to you now from a place that once felt impossible. My life is stable. Quiet. Grounded. There's no chaos waiting behind closed doors. No fear attached to familiar voices. I wake up knowing who I am, and I go to sleep without needing to escape my thoughts. That alone is a kind of wealth I never knew how to measure before. I built this life slowly. Not out of anger. Not to prove anything. But out of respect, for myself. Every decision I make now carries intention. I choose where my energy goes. I choose who has access to me. And most importantly, I choose peace even when old patterns try to pull me back. My parents and my brother still exist in the world I moved on from. They live with the consequences they once refused to acknowledge. I don't watch closely. I don't celebrate their struggles. And I don't step in to save them anymore. Not because I'm cold, but because I've learned that rescuing people from their choices only delays their growth. That was a hard lesson. Letting go of the instinct to fix, to absorb, to sacrifice myself for the comfort of others. But once I understood it, I never looked back. There's a quiet power in no longer being needed for survival, only for presence. And I reserve that presence for the life I've chosen to build. I don't carry bitterness. That's important to say. Bitterness would mean they still occupy space inside me. They don't. What I carry now is understanding. Understanding that people don't betray you because you're weak. They betray because they are unprepared for integrity. They choose shortcuts when character demands patience. That realization freed me. Karma didn't arrive as punishment. It arrived as truth. Everyone eventually meets the weight of their decisions. Some people grow under it. Others collapse. That outcome is never yours to control. What is yours to control is who you become afterward. I became someone who doesn't beg for love. Someone who doesn't explain pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. Someone who knows that dignity isn't loud, and strength doesn't need witnesses. And now, I want to speak directly to you. If you've been betrayed by family, by someone you trusted, by a version of yourself that stayed too long, hear this clearly. Betrayal does not define you. It reveals others, but it refines you. What shapes your future isn't what they did. It's what you do when the ground beneath you disappears. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need closure from people who lack accountability. And you don't need to be understood by those who benefited from your silence. You need self-respect. You need boundaries that protect your peace. And you need the courage to build a life that doesn't require approval from the past. I built mine alone, but I was never lonely in the process. Because every step forward brought me closer to myself. And when you finally stand there, rooted, steady, unafraid, you realize something powerful. Walking away wasn't losing everything. It was gaining everything that mattered. This is what emotional victory looks like. Not applause. Not vindication. But a calm heart, a clear conscience, and a life that no longer hurts to live. And if you're still in the middle of your storm, remember this. The fact that you're still standing means your story isn't over. It means you're becoming. And that is how you win.